last year to bring together unusual combinations of people and organizations to find radical and practical ways to improve our climate, our health, our nature, and the economy. And with a particular focus on three themes: healthy food is everybody's business, farming can be a force for change, and countryside is everyone's business. So the focus of this particular work is on the farming is a force for change, and the recommendation from the Commission to explore the potential of a transition to a fully agroecological farming system in the UK by 2030. So I guess that ticks the radical part of our box. You know, that's quite a big ambition. I think what we're here to do today and through our Routes to Action workshops is to really test out the feasibility, the practicality of that sort of approach across a whole suite of different areas. So the focus of today is all about the sort of technical agronomic feasibility of this type of farming system in the UK. That's what we want to unpack, and that's what we're keen to get all of your contributions to today. I'll just drop in a bit of housekeeping before we cover off the rest of the introductions. The session is being recorded so that it's available for other people to watch and digest at a later date. So yeah, please, as usual, if you can keep your microphones off just to avoid any background noise for the time being. But also, as it's being recorded, if you'd rather not have your face on the recording, then please keep your video off. But equally, it's really lovely to actually see people while we're going through this discussion throughout the next hour or so. Just a couple other things. If you want to follow the discussion afterwards on social media, please follow the Routes to Action Twitter hashtag. And yeah, the FFCC team will be available on this call in the chat for answering all sorts of broad questions about our work and what we're doing. And then finally, it's just to say it's just a little bit of how we're approaching this, and it's something the Prophet Michael Blanche, who's prophet to me anyway, farmer up in Scotland, once said to me, is the first rule of Farming Club is that every farm is different, and there are no right or wrong answers or approaches. So please sort of keep that in your mind as we go about this conversation today. So that's the housekeeping done. Why are we all here? So in January, we published a report called Farming for Change, mapping a route to 2030. This was really starting a conversation about this feasibility of transitioning to an agroecological farming system in the UK by 2030. It was really based on a sort of academic piece of work from the IDRI think tank, modeling the UK food system. And its real first intention was to answer the question, can you feed a country through this type of food and farming system? Because it seems like that has been the sort of stopping point for this conversation for a long, long time, because it instantly ends when people say, well, you can't feed a country this way, therefore it will always be niche, and it will never really be a mainstream compelling proposition. So that was what we wanted to answer. We believe, based on that modeling, that the answer is yes, you can, if you pull all of the levers at your disposal and think about the whole system in a more holistic way. But that's all very well from an academic sort of theoretical point of view, but what does that really look like in action? What's really feasible on the ground in different parts of the UK, in different sectors, in different farming systems? And that's what we're looking to sort of discuss and unpack today. So this is the first of 4 or 5 workshops. This one is really focused on the technical and agronomic feasibility. Next week, we will be covering land management more generally, and then we will be looking at the economics of this, whether that's the cost at a farm level or the sort of food price regime that we have in the UK. And then we'll be looking at the cultural elements. What's the potential for more collaboration, knowledge, learning, mentoring networks within the UK, and then finally looking at how we bring this all together for a better policy environment for UK agriculture. So we're very conscious that all of those themes, which we're going to be looking at over the next 4 weeks, are all really interconnected at a farming level, and to just address them in isolation is not always possible. But for today's workshop, if we could just focus as much as possible the answers and the discussion on the technical and agronomic aspects, rather than it costs too much, or we don't like it, or the policy doesn't allow us to do it. Even though we do recognise that is all very much connected. So that's what we're trying to do. The purpose is really to bring very quickly groups together like this to share evidence from their backgrounds, to share ideas that they may have had or that they are working on, or stories, anecdotes, people they've met who are on this journey, who are trialing new and different ways of farming under an agroecological system. So the plea from us today is we're going to try and rapidly harvest and garner as much information from you as possible on this hour and a half Zoom session. And we will be doing that in a number of ways. So first of all, we've got a brilliant panel to get the conversation going. And part of the design is really that, I don't know whether other people find this, but I find when you're listening to other people talking about how they've done this, real life practitioners, it stimulates a lot of thinking and thoughts about how you might do that, or where the barriers are within your particular business or system. What we'd like you to do is when you react to that is just write that down, either in the chat or stick your hand up at the end when we get into the open discussion bit. But the main thing that which we'd really love you to help us with is to complete a short survey, which Verity will put in the chat in a minute, if it's not already there, which is really, it's a basic SWOT analysis of agroecology and at a sort of a technical farming level. So it'd be lovely if you could all spend a bit of time as we go through this call, putting down what you think are the opportunities, the strengths, the weaknesses, the threats from this type of approach, whether in your business, within your area, or if you have a more nationwide view, then from that perspective too. So that's what we're really looking to achieve. And then finally, we're very conscious that to try and have this conversation about changing our agronomy and do it any justice in an hour and a half on Zoom is almost impossible. So it's unlikely we're going to finish all of the various strands and elements and directions that this conversation could go in. And so another thing is, if more people want to have these conversations, we're happy to support it, whether that's a follow-up to this or organizations looking to convene their own routes to action discussions and workshops. So that's the sort of the outcomes that we're looking for, and the sort of design of the next sort of 3-4 weeks of these kind of workshops. So I'm going to start waffling on because it's nearly 1:15 already, and I'm going to start the session, which will be the next half an hour or so, with our lovely panel of speakers who've agreed to come and help get the conversation going, to share some of their insights and expertise in this area. So we have on the panel, we have Lucy Bates from LEAF, Linking Environment and Farming, who is the technical manager there. We have Ed Horton, who farms mixed farming system just outside Cirencester. And we have Becky Wilson from the Farm Carbon Cutting Toolkit, and also wearing a lot of other hats as well outside of that too. So without any further ado, I think we're going to get the conversation going. And Lucy, happy to hand over to you. Lucy works with a wonderful network of farmers within LEAF, and yeah, lots of demonstration farms, lots of work on integrated farm management, and a huge amount of learnings to bring to the table. So Lucy, over to you.
Thank you, Will. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All good. Right then. Good morning, people. Lovely to be here. Thank you very much for organising this. And of course, for getting together such an interesting report over the past months, and especially over Christmas. So I'm going to give you a bit of background about LEAF for those of you that don't know us. I've got some familiar names on the call, so I know that some of you do. LEAF and how we link really with the underpinning agroecological principles that this report alludes to, and how that looks on the ground for us. and from our perspective of our demonstration and leaf marker short farmers. So we're 30 this year. Leaf is not me personally, but Leaf itself is 30 this year. And it's been working through those years to develop and promote and facilitate the practice of integrated farm management. So that's kind of with capital letters. IFM is the acronym we use, and I'll use from here on in. And that's really a systemic approach, and it embodies the agroecological principles that are discussed in the FFCC report pretty much at every level. IFM is a whole farm site-specific approach, and there's no one size fits all. It's not a set of rules. It's a frame of mind. It's a way of thinking, and it can be applied to all farm sectors and sizes of business models. So IFM looks to utilise the best of traditional, conventional, organic, innovative techniques, and the real intention is to deliver incremental gains across the 9 areas of integrated farm management. And I've got the little wheel up behind me here, you can see today. And so this will be familiar to some of you. Any more information, of course, go to our website. But we have 9 stated interrelated areas. And the idea is that there's then a significant enhancement of environmental, social and economic sustainability across the board. So in every one of those areas, really operate guidance to review and plan and then do and then repeat. That's really the mantra. And continuous improvement is the expectation from that process. So we have a long-term focus on win-wins between agriculture and the environment. And that means looking to work with and within agroecological systems that sustain ecosystem services. Pollination, virus vector predation, nitrogen fixation, nutrient cycling, water resilience, carbon sequestration, among others. Also, importantly, with communities and across the whole supply chain to really build strong foundations on which to sustain agroecological production. So we muted myself. Growing network of demonstration farms and innovation centres to really constantly review and update best practice in every area of IFM. How does this look on the ground? What is the guidance? And illustrate its application across contexts. So we have education and outreach work, which includes CVAS farmer training, Farmer Time, which was formerly FaceTime a Farmer, and the coordination of open, or this year online, Open Farm Sunday, to advance social engagement and sustainability with agricultural ecosystems. So LEAF also operates an internationally recognised and ISIL compliant assurance system. So you might have recognised this as the LEAF mark, and this certifies over 1,000 businesses in 27 countries that demonstrate IFM practice according to a specific set of control points as represented in the current LEAF mark standard. And that's an annual independent audit that each one of those businesses goes through in order to achieve LEAF mark certification. So all the control points in the LEAF mark standard are additional to baseline schemes such as Red Tractor or Global Gap, and that gives a recognised additionality as an environmental assurance scheme. A stat that I particularly like is that 43% of UK produced fruit and veg is grown to LEAF mark standard. So agroecology, as demonstrated through IFM, is really a way of thinking. That's how we see not just IFM, but the wider picture of agroecology. It's not a prescribed system of production or conservation. I think seeing growing recognition of the importance and viability and really timeliness, the prescience of this being scaled up to address contemporary challenges in the UK and beyond, it's a really brilliant way to celebrate our 30th anniversary and to mark the times that we find ourselves in. So in terms of how increasing nature in the farmed landscape can deliver healthier crops, which was kind of a focus that we were asked to look at for this presentation, I think it'll come as no surprise to anyone here today that ecosystem services, including, but of course not limited to the ones that I mentioned just now, they're really fundamental to the production of food, fuel, fibre, everything to do with human provisioning, the things we need to grow. Some of these might be temporarily or partially replaceable by technical or chemical solutions, but really that complexity and sophisticated interdependence of thriving soil and air and water, the alive biomes, these are the ultimate influencers of plant health and crop productivity. And it's these we concentrate on in LEAF and our farmers look to demonstrate. In the context of today's real agronomic subject, there's a clear line of reference here to how the past 50 years of what have seemed like very simple and indeed almost magic solutions to some of the challenges that farmers have faced across all the time is really an era drawing to a close to an extent. A combination of reduced efficacy through resistance and reduced availability through legislative response to eventually what really is just better understood impacts of chemistry. The new agronomy is entering a new era where nature-based solutions are really among the most realistic and achievable on the market. So agronomists have always worked with their clients to fit together the ever-evolving jigsaw of solutions to best effect. And we believe that this profession and the farmers that practice agronomy are really well equipped to embrace this ongoing challenge. Chemistry remains a feature of the crop protection landscape, as does biochemistry, and LEAF really works to continue developing the positive integration of both of these approaches into thriving agroecological systems. IPM, integrated pest management, is a very current phrase in LEAF and well beyond, and across the spectrum of farming organisations as responses to the National Action Plan on sustainable use of pesticides is being prepared. I know probably by some of you on this call, it's a conversation that we're having between ourselves with each other. For LEAF, integrated pest management sits very firmly within integrated crop management, sitting within integrated farm management, and then integrated landscape management holding all of these. There are specific examples, of course, of how increased diversity integrated into the farmed landscape can deliver on healthier crops. In-field provision of beetle banks as habitats, diverse swards and herb-rich lays contributing to livestock health and reducing antibiotic or anthelmintic requirements, in-field diversity through plant teams leading to reduced insecticide use. We know that the provision and connectivity of habitat areas allows wild populations to thrive, maintain genetic diversity that underpins the survival of individual species and ultimately the biodiversity that gives resilience to the system as a whole. And the LEAF Mark standard recognises this through substantial landscape and nature conservation section, with LEAF Mark farms actively managing for biodiversity, an average of 13% of their farm business area. So that's just to give you an idea of how that focus is reflected on the ground in LEAF Mark businesses. There are arguments that we may hear today for land sharing and land sparing, but LEAF sees the pragmatic reality being a healthy balance of the two, depending on the crop of the context. There's no field, even right in the middle of it, that doesn't have nature in it, and whatever's done within a field influences all other areas around it. So attention to detail across the cropping system is really the key to LEAF's approach and to integrated farm management. And an area where this might be best demonstrated is where repeated testing of soil, tissue and grain for nutrient use efficiency can see reductions of 15 to 20% in input without yield penalty, as recently demonstrated in one of our Jordan's Farm Partnership arable enterprises that we've done a little case study on. Partnership with Cancer Sensitive Farming to produce an ongoing series of best practice case studies have highlighted the application of best practice to inputs and incorporation timing to reduce nitrogen losses as well as diffuse pollution. That happens across LEAF Mark businesses. And the consideration of appropriate cultivation techniques and timings is a really key area of this. I'm sure many of you will agree. Cover cropping is an area that many of our demonstration farms have really led the field in over the past decade. So now built up as sort of backgrounds of strong evidence of the diversity of approaches that might be most appropriate to different farms and soils and rotations. Soil care, of course, is a core aspect of IFM, as it is of every farming system. The soil management and fertility section of the standard is updated to reflect growing awareness of soil health metrics, and of course links closely with every other area, including water management, crop health and protection, livestock husbandry. Again, the nature-based solution of leguminous nitrogen fixation is enabled through supply chain awareness of the agronomic as well as resource efficiency benefits to homegrown proteins and diverse rotations. I think I'm probably running out of time here, so I'm just going to quickly say that LEAF demo farms employ a wide spectrum of technologies and techniques. We really believe that it's not just technologies, it's technologies and techniques. It's practice as well as kit that supports integrated farm management and good farming as we know it. But none of these stand alone in place of the integrated approach that IFM and indeed the definition of agroecology that the Food Farming Countryside Commission report employs represents. Of course, we hope that recognition of the great outcomes possible will come through enabling policies, through ELMS and beyond, but above and beyond this, we really hope to inspire confidence in farmers that the next agronomic era is already here, it's accessible to all, and the benefits of embracing it are real and tangible. It's great to be here today. This is a really, really good time to be part of the conversation, and this is a really exciting event to be at, to engage in that. So over back to you, Will. I hope that didn't run over too much. Thank you.
Super job, Lucy. Thank you very much. Yeah, it covered a lot of ground there, and we will get into some of the detail as we go on through the session. Lucy, I'm just going to come back to you though quickly. I was just wondering, we've had 30 years of leaf and demonstration farms and farms that have been adopting this type of approach for a long time and have become, real practitioners and learned a lot along the journey. Are there any key learnings from particular farms or the network of farms which are coming out now, which make a lot of sense? Is there anything? I know everyone is doing lots of different things which integrate together, but are there any particular practices or techniques which leaf demo farms they've really sort of nailed down, and it feels like a sort of bit of a no-brainer in terms of their approach to agronomy at the moment? Is there anything
I would say, first of all, really important, reiteration of that leaf demonstration farms as leaf farm business, massively diverse. We cover every sector. We cover protected cropping and upland livestock, as well as large swathes of arable. But I would say that the current conversations that are happening, having built up a really strong evidence base for the diversity of approaches to cover cropping and where this really works, ways in doing this well, that's a real strength of the demonstration farm network and the impact that has in the long term on nutrient cycling within a farm. I'd also say the integration of livestock and the observation and recording of the benefits of that is a really strong evidence base that's come out of that long-term experience, and positive manure, back to basics, really positive manure management, integrating the nutritional value of livestock outputs with a whole system that utilizes those efficiently and effectively and safely. So that's just an example of a couple. There's plenty more, and I'm sure more will emerge over the coming conversation. It's a diverse church, and I think that's why it's particularly relevant to the kind of intersector conversation that we're having today and at the moment. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Lucy. I'm going to come back to you with one more, because we may not get there as the conversation unfolds, and that's really, you've got a large volume of the sort of fruit and veg produced in the UK LEAF Mark certified. And one of the outcomes of the report and the IDRI modelling was really trying to increase the amount of horticultural production in the UK. What are the kind of, agronomic challenges those businesses are facing at the moment? As you said, there's more regulation on crop chemistry, there's more resistance, and I think a lot of these sort of specialist crops, have been developed quite dependent on these kind of systems, and have probably been early adopters to more nature-based solutions. Are they working? Are they scalable? Can we cope without this chemistry to the extent that we've maybe had it before?
I think you have nailed a really important challenge there. But I would also say you've observed that horticulture, particularly protected cropping, is a long way ahead of broad scale, has had that head start on running out of chemical solutions, some time before. In terms of domestic horticultural production, is more about soil, actually. It's more about questions of maintaining soil health and reducing carbon losses from that high level of cultivation, which is more inherent to broad-scale horticulture than possibly the arable. I think this might be something that Becky comes back to, but I would say that could be one of the biggest challenges to sustainably producing the level of domestic horticultural produce that your report is looking to. I think that by turning it around, I don't think it is IPM. I think it is about soil care and carbon release. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Lucy. I'm just going to come to it because Elizabeth, been brilliant. First question. We needed to get the questions up and running in the chat box. So please, people, get your questions and observations into the chat function when you can. Just wondering, how are you going about, or how are your farms going about measuring nutrient cycling? I was particularly interested when you were talking about how do we reduce nutrient nitrogen losses from these type of farming systems, which seems to be a big issue which we need to sort of wrap our heads around today. What are there any particular approaches which you can put your finger on?
There is one, because literally 2 weeks ago we did a lovely little case study. He had to film it himself because we couldn't go and see him, but one of our Jordan's Farm Partnership leaf mark businesses, which is in Hampshire, all arables, got no livestock in the system, and he set himself the target of 20% reduction in inputs without yield loss over 4 years. He's at 15% at the moment, and he's put together a really impressive routine of testing. So deep mineral nitrogen testing, soil mineral nitrogen testing, to really guide those spring applications, tissue testing through the growing season, green area index, tying application to need of the crop, and then grain testing after harvest to really guide those micronutrients and phosphorus, for instance. Really, and he's making really good gains there. It won't be the same for every farm. Leaf doesn't have a way of nitrogen use efficiency testing, but I would say that's a really excellent example of how joined up thinking at every stage in the process is facilitating reduced inputs without reduced yields for a leaf mark farmer. It's an example, but there are more.
Super. Thank you very much, Lucy. I'll let you off the hook for now, but thank you very much for answering those questions. Right, just a reminder to everyone, just to keep, make sure you, feedback, any thoughts or observations in the chat. One thing I forgot to mention before we got into the panel session was that in the survey that Verity has put in the chat link, you will see a description of the assumptions which went into the sort of technical modeling behind this research, which describes perhaps a more extreme approach to this than Lucy was articulating. We modeled the extreme, which was a complete elimination of the use of sprays and chemical controls, complete reduction in artificial nitrogen, and a focus on a much more extensive system. Now, that is a very extreme picture to paint, but I guess part of the question and discussion is obviously about the feasibility of that agronomically in the UK. There's lots of question marks, and that's what we want to be talking about. So please do jump onto the survey, have a look at those, and do feedback your thoughts and observations about how we've gone setting up that approach. That would be really appreciated. Right, we're going to dash on to our next panelist, which is Ed Horton, who farms down near Cirencester. It's been a bit of a sort of a 5-year journey of transitioning their farm at home and the land that they manage to a more agroecological approach. I think you're now growing something in the region of 16 different crops in a very long 13-year rotation is the ambition anyway, with integrated livestock and a whole heap of other tricks up your sleeve on how you're approaching the challenge of farming in this way. So Ed, I'm going to stop waffling on because you can talk about this a lot better than I can. Over to you.
Thanks, Will. So good afternoon, everyone. I will give a brief rattle through where we are, what we do, and some of the things that we do that would be considered agroecological. And then if anyone has any questions about quite how bonkers they think my farming system is, please ask. So yeah, as Will said, we are based just outside Cirencester, up on top of the Cotswolds. So we run across a fair amount of limestone brash hills, but we run down into the Thames Valley. So we do have some very heavy clay and some very light sandy gravels that we have to manage, which gives us a good variation in soil type to play with. We are predominantly conventional, but we also have an organic farm in the system as well, which means I get to look at the agroecology side of life from a conventional point of view, where we still have the use of chemicals and we still do use artificial inputs, and then look at it in a completely different spectrum, or slightly different spectrum, of the fully organic, where obviously I have no access to that. We are a mixed farm. We always have been. We've always relied very heavily on livestock as part of our system. We have a pig finishing unit. We've got a pedigree herd of beef cattle, a big flock of sheep, as well as the arable, and there is some veg in the system as well, which is not that conventional on that side of life. With the arable side, as Will mentioned, we grow part of our system, and part of working our system is growing a large range of crops and not relying on a short, sharp rotation. So we grow milling wheat, biscuit wheat, feed wheat, malting barley, oilseed rape, beans, peas, maize, combinable rye, milling oats, spelt, triticale. We also grow seed crops of Facelia and buckwheat. We have turnips, garlic, herb and legume rich grass lays, and a whole variety of cover crops that all play a part in the system in one way or another. Each brings their own challenge, and each brings their own benefit to our system. And encompassing all of that and across all the land that we farm, we have a very large mid-tier scheme, which has the benefit of making us slightly less reliant on sellable produce, but also helps some of the underlying agroecological principles of having nature and having biodiversity within the farming system. That is a key part of what I found that helps our system to work how it does. And part of our mid-tier scheme is also a lot of water meadow regeneration land that we currently have. It's currently standing very deep in water, but as part of a space for water scheme, we now take a whole load of water back onto what once was arable land, on some thin gravelly soils that historically probably would have been a crop of winter wheat by now, that with water standing on it or rushing over it would have been ditching nutrients and silt into a river. It is now it's now the most amazing wading bird site. We have the biggest numbers of lapwings I've ever seen standing out there, and we get some great grazing out of it in the summer. So part of the sort of agroecological principles that we use on the farm, so obviously a big one of them is recycling nutrients. So we, from our livestock side of life, we produce a lot of FYM and an awful lot of slurry. We top dress as much of our combinable crops with slurry as we can, which has meant that we have sort of a between 45 and 50% reduction in use of artificial N as a whole. And then also part of recycling nutrients, that with all of our grass lays being herb and legume rich mixes, that we are fixing nitrogen through the use of legumes. So we're not having to rely on bought-in inputs to grow our grass that feeds the cattle and the sheep. And we also graze a lot of our arable crops. It's not that sort of well practiced at the moment, but historically it was basically your only disease control back in my grandfather's day. And part of that grazing, as well as removing disease, also allows us to recycle nutrients that may not be recycled as quickly by waiting for leaf matter, let's say the bottom of an oilseed rape canopy, for leaf matter to break down and to release those nutrients. We put the sheep over it to knock it back and recycle those nutrients far quicker through the system. Another part of the sort of agroecological principles is the whole reducing of inputs, which, like I've mentioned before, we use with slurry. And by using the grazing, so for instance, just this morning we've been moving sheep off some triticale and pushing them back onto some wheat. By removing all the green growth that we currently have that's been there since October, November, since emergence. We have removed any latent infection on old leaves that drive nothing for yield whatsoever. So all they have actually become is a slight nursery for disease. By removing them with the sheep, we now get to a stage where we are massively reducing fungicide inputs, because we don't have the latent infection to start the season with that we're always fighting. We start basically in the next 2 weeks, when they start to re-emerge, at a perfectly sort of fresh, clean slate. As well as grazing, we also now have removed basically all herbicides from our farming system. So now we rely on either companion cropping to smother things out of the way that I don't want. For instance, with our oilseed rape, we use a combination of clovers and buckwheat to basically smother anything out that shouldn't be there. And on the sort of more sort of cereal side of life, we are now inter-row hoeing with camera guided hoes, so using technology to help us on that front, and allowing us to remove the need for applying herbicides anymore. And then tying all this together is the biodiversity and the soil health side of life. So the underlying part of all this is that if my soil isn't functioning properly and isn't working properly, all of these ideas are great, but actually if the soil isn't giving anything to a plant, I can't really achieve very much with it. So part of our soil health has been along the lines of removing a lot of tillage. We still do. We are very flexible in what we do. We still do have a plough, and we still do cultivate things. It's not all about direct drilling, but that is a big part of it for keeping carbon in the soil to feed soil microbes. And the biodiversity side of it, with our mid-tier scheme, with margins, with infill beetle banks, creating much bigger habitat spaces through blocks of land, the use of companion cropping with things like oilseed rape, getting predators into the middle of a field rather than relying on, we haven't used insecticide on any of our crops. I think now this is our 9th year of having not had to use insecticide, and we still are yet to lose a crop of oilseed rape to flea beetle, and I'm still yet to find any BYDV in a cereal crop, because we have the natural predators now that keep aphids and flea beetles under control. And yeah, part of the sort of tying in with the soil health and animal health, as Lucy mentioned, is our use of multi-species herb and legume rich lays. So we've been able to reduce our use of wormers through the livestock by using herbal lays, by rotationally grazing cereals, so we don't have a worm burden in the soil already, because they're only grazed once a year, and also by actually now we're doing a lot of trial work with worming lambs, worming ewes across chicory, instead of having to use sort of an artificial wormer. So part of what Will's asked me to talk about is how we got started, and I think some of that I've already covered. But sort of being a mixed farm, we are sort of part of the way there already in our system. It's sort of formed the basis for what we do. And like I said, now with direct drilling, with the use of cover crops over winter or over summer, especially if we have a weed problem, instead of cropping it now and having to fight it, actually we'll put a cover crop in, we'll graze it, we'll remove seed return from the system, and then moving that onto then companion cropping. So rather than just not cropping it now, we now companion crop things. So for instance, like I said, oilseed rape, we grow with clover, we grow wheat with clover at the moment, we grow Facelia with beans to help give some extra pollen. That was sort of the starting point. We then moved on to removing all seed dressings out of our system. So we don't put any fungicidal seed dressings on anything that goes in the ground anymore, because I want the seeds that I'm putting in the ground to engage with the fungi that are there, having spent a lot of time and effort building soil carbon and building soil health and getting the soil working, to then coat a seed in a fungicide and shove it into what is effectively a perfectly primed system, and then ask it to basically kill everything it needs to interact with, has struck me as a little strange occasionally. So instead of fungicidal seed dressings, we now use basically a cocktail of trace elements, and that, as Lucy covered, is all designed around constant soil sampling, tissue sampling, and grain sampling. So where we're planting, I know what our soil scores are. I know what our soils struggle to hold on to, being predominantly limestone. We struggle to hold a lot of elements in place. And then throughout historical tissue sampling, we know vaguely how things play out through the growing season, and so we can prep for it. And so we mix a cocktail of trace elements that prime specific plants or specific seeds in specific places to engage best with the soil biology. So they do change between limestone and gravel and clay, because they have different aspects that affect it. But like Lucy said, a lot of what it is down to testing and recording to then bring the system forward. We've always used our slurries. We're now getting better at using them. And again, as Lucy mentioned, it is down to testing and use of that slurry. It's not a waste. I don't see our slurries as a waste product that we need to sort of manage and get rid of. They are a key part of what we do and how we grow stuff. And so we are, we sample them before we spread, we sample whilst we're spreading, we then do tissue and soil samples 2 weeks and 4 weeks after spreading to make sure that what we thought we were putting on, we've actually gained, and how efficient that has been. So that's sort of the way through which we've sort of started. So starting from always being a mixed farm to direct drilling cover crops, to now seed dressings out, and then onto removal of fungicides and herbicides to a system where basically we are now far less reliant on external inputs than we ever were before. It's not all plain sailing, as much as I'd like to think it was. There are, and have been, and still are, ongoing challenges as part of our system. I've mentioned before things like BYDV and flea beetle are two big issues that affect basically every arable grower out there, unless you're lucky enough to live in a part of the world where aphids don't appear when you don't want them to. And BYDV is a constant threat in our system, with having no use of insecticides through my own choice. So as I pointed out, using nature and using biodiversity to make sure that actually we have the predator numbers available to start attacking aphids as soon as they start to move in, means that we are yet to have a complete crop failure through BYDV. We've had patches on the top of a hill where some aphids have blown in, and you can see where they spread in the spring, but actually you then go and look at it on a sort of a warm day in November, early in the morning, and you can't see the ground for spider webs, and spiders are pretty good at trapping them and disposing of them. Another challenge has been our reduction of inputs has been high on the agenda of what we've tried to achieve, but it does come with its issues. Removing fungicide is great in theory, if only I could model the weather slightly better than it actually happens. That we can plan that we can get a crop to a certain stage, and with very limited fungicide input, we might be able to get through the system. And sometimes come mid-June, a wet week it can make or break a crop. And we have in the past had crops where we basically lost the flag leaf to either yellow rust or septoria, which is always a bit of a knock, but that seems to happen very rarely because we are choosing varieties based upon disease resistance. Right? I never look at yield when I choose a variety. I look at its yield resistance and its end market, which fits us. Another challenge that we have faced is, again, the removal of herbicides. It is great from a soil health point of view and from a gross margin point of view, but again, it does come with its issues. The just going cold turkey failed for us on a block that we tried it on. We just removed 1 year all herbicide inputs, full stop. Actually, what we should have done is wound our way down through it. So we still need to use occasionally Roundup pre-drilling, but to mitigate some of the antimicrobial effects that Roundup can have, we're now mixing it with short chain carbons in the form of fulvic or humic acid to help mitigate some of the effects that these chemicals can have on soil biology. So it's not about totally removing everything from the system. It is more about choosing when and where to apply something, and working out the pros and cons of doing it prior to application, and working out if there is a way of mitigating some of the effects. For instance, we did a lot of work with the Hydrology and Ecology Society, and looked at fungicide usage and how certain fungicides can have a detrimental effect on soil fungi and how some others actually can benefit. And so therefore that is always a start point for me if we have to use fungicides, is looking at the effects on soil health rather than the effect on the disease that I'm trying to manage. And another challenge has been I've had to learn to live with a lot more disease in crops, but we found a way of now managing it to a level where it doesn't impact our yields too much. I've had to learn to live with the fact that some of my crops don't look very tidy, where we grow them with companion crops or we're grazing them. You know, just this morning, having moved sheep off a field of triticale, my neighbour's winter barley is looking lush and green, and mine is currently looking a bit brown because we've removed all the green area. But that is a personal challenge that I have to deal with every now and then. So some of the key sort of approaches I think that I've found that have helped us go through this system has been some of it's based around education. So things like this, listening and talking to other people out there, have been some of the biggest helps, biggest help that I could have found. Another one is learning that sometimes less is actually more. That we're on some yield limited soils up here. We're never going to produce 10 tons per hectare of wheat. It's basically physically impossible on our ground. And actually producing a far lower yielding crop that is far more sustainable, environmentally friendly, and actually comes out with a better gross margin, puts me in a much safer place moving forward. And having a lot of flexibility has been the other part of it, in the fact that my rotations never fix. We change them quite literally on a weekly basis, depending on looking at what soils look like now at this time of year, looking at spring cropping, looking at what condition soils are in. We've actually changed where we might put some spring wheat that we actually now are going to put a cover crop, just because I'm not happy with the soil structure, and forcing a bad crop into the system that is actually not going to make me anything is not really a sustainable way forward. And a lot of testing and benchmarking, so constantly comparing what we're looking at now as to what we have done in the past, and benchmarking that against other more traditional conventional farms to see actually how we are performing, because sometimes we don't perform as well, and that is something that either I need to look at and try and address, or actually sometimes maybe accept that there are certain scenarios where I won't be able to out yield a more sort of conventional system. So some of the results that we've seen over the past, I mean, we've been seriously at it for 5 years, but over the past sort of 10 years or so of having a slightly lower input system, we've had a huge increase in biodiversity. So that's with habitat creation, with the use of our water meadows, with integrating livestock into the system. We now have far more wildlife and biodiversity, A, in our soils, and B, moving around the farm. We've seen a large increase in carbon capturing ability of our soils. So we have far more active carbon in there working away. And so therefore, the more organic matter we can add, the more carbon we can fix. So that has been a fairly big result. And we now actually produce more of an output in the way of saleable commodities than we used to, because we've got such a large range of things that can all fit into the system in their own little part, that we have actually been able to up our output strangely whilst being far less intensive and actually farming less ground as a percentage of the whole. And so looking at yields, which is always quite an interesting one, we never had a sharp drop, because our system, we went into it slowly. We didn't start on, like I said, we didn't start on day one and go, right, that's it, I'm going to change our system in one go. As we sort of crept into it slowly over the years, we have seen we did see a sort of a gentle decline whilst the system sort of kicked in, and whilst issues, wrinkles are being worked out. So I mean, in a high yielding wheat year in our area, we might yield somewhere between 10 and 15% less than our neighbours. on identical soil types. In an average year, we tend to sit plus or minus 5% either side of actually where we used to be. And actually, ironically, in very bad years, our system seems to yield slightly better. For instance, last year we yielded in our HDB benchmarking group, we managed to actually yield better than some of our neighbours in a very sort of drought stressed, well, after a wet autumn and a drought stressed summer. It does differ with different crops. Wheat is fairly sort of ambivalent about life. It doesn't seem to mind our system. Barley and rape yields have actually increased by the use of this system. And oats, beans and maize, they do struggle with it a bit occasionally, but there are still things to sort of work out through that. So we have found that we have better resilience to extremes of weather, and it allows us to sort of our broad range spectrum of things on the farm allow us to be, we are now more risk averse in one respect, because we have so many different aspects to look at. When if one fails or one doesn't do very well, there is something else that can either pick up the slack, or if we have a crop of wheat that is so full of something that I can't get rid of, wild oats, for instance, I have the option of whole cropping it and putting in a silage plant to feed a cow, which means it's not a total loss. It's a readjustment of a loss and a readjustment of an end use, but it still has a place in our system, and those nutrients will still come back in the form of FYM back to where it came from. So that is sort of a brief ramble through the basis of what we do. I hope that was useful.
Ed, thank you. I knew my mind would explode at some point during this call, and I think it just has. But and I knew also my idea for timing on doing this call was also going to be well off. So so many questions, so many brilliant questions coming in from participants as well. I just wanted to quickly fire a couple back at you. One is one of my own. I'm just taking, ability to do that. Are you on a road to getting to zero completely on sort of artificial inputs? Is that an achievable objective? Is it a desirable one? Does it give you too little control? And how long would that take? Have you got any thoughts?
I mean, having organic in the system does give me the option of looking at how it works the other side of life. And the one thing that tempers my enthusiasm for going wholly organic is that our organic does not yield, or the yield as well, actually, ironically, but we don't get the impact from it. I can't grow certain crops in an organic system yet. I haven't learned how to do it. I'm still playing with them. So yes, in an ideal world, obviously I would like to be at a stage where we're not buying an external artificial input, because that reduces my reliance on and sort of reduces my exposure to external market factors that will have an impact on our gross margin. But at the moment, it is more about the fact that we have removed certain things entirely, and we have reduced everything else drastically over the past sort of 5-7 years. And I think we're getting to a stage where the next step is then to maybe remove everything, but then that makes it organic, and not all of us, we're not soil, not the whole place isn't certified soil association, so therefore we then might take a bigger yield hit and not gain the benefit of being organic out the other end. So it's something we're in the middle of umming and ahhing about.
Thank you. And then a point which may seem quite like maybe it's a bit peripheral, but tongue-in-cheek, but it's just about tidy farming and this perception of needing to have everything completely under your control, up together, neat and tidy, that I guess exists within a sense of what farming should be like. How did you sort of let go a little bit? Have you yet completely? Maybe you haven't. And also just additional to that, just in terms of advice, I mean, I know you're facts-based trained agronomist yourself, so you're in a good position to have a go at trialing and playing these things. Is there, for people who maybe don't have that background, how would they get started? Is advice available out there?
So on the tidy farm front, I still have to remind myself when I drive down a road and mine is on the left and my neighbour's is on the right, that the fact that you can't see my Aussie rape at the moment because it's buried under clover and it's got dead buckwheat sticking out the top of it, and my neighbour's is lush and green and looks like a field of rape, that I have to remind myself occasionally that it's okay, because mine is doing my soil more favours, supposedly. No, the tidy farm thing, it is still there, and there are still we still do go and top grass tracks out where we're going to drive on them, but a lot of it I have accepted with the fact that there is a benefit to it not being tidy. If it's immaculately tidy and every one of our grass margins was beautifully mown, 6 meters of grass right up to the edge of the hedge, it's not actually achieving anything for me other than producing a nice strip of grass that I can walk around. It's not holding any life. It's got no flowering plants in it. It's not holding any habitat for hibernating insects and mammals over the winter. So that is part of it, is that, yeah, letting go of the tidiness factor comes with the fact that actually that's one of the quickest ways I found to increase biodiversity, is where we've taken on contract farms and we stop topping margins that they like to top 4 times a year during the summer. Biggest impact and the quickest build up of insect life next to a hedge comes from a margin. And the advice front, there are a whole load of you'd be amazed at how many agronomists, when you actually ask them, would quite like to do this. A whole load of them, and I was one. You are trained to recommend chemicals and to look after everything to its peak ability, and actually a lot of agronomists do want to look at how to do this with less of an impact and with less of a reliance on chemicals. And so there is an awful lot out there. If you pin an agronomist down and ask him strongly enough, he or she will actually probably come out with the fact that, yeah, you could get away with putting less on. They just don't want to run the risk of being the one held responsible when it doesn't work as well.
Yeah, and then the final one I'm coming to is just really about farming in a temperate climate where everything is changing quite quickly weather-wise, and it makes it quite difficult to be able to like plan and control like what are essentially sort of like nature and ecological systems which you depend on. But how do you see, like, you know, casting ahead, you know, another 5 years, and we're on this trajectory with more and more extreme weather, and does this make it more, or does it make it more difficult for this kind of approach to work? Does it make it more risky, or is it the other side of the coin? It just feels like we're a wet island in Northwest Europe, and therefore to be able to control the pests and disease and weeds is always going to be a big chunky challenge on our plate. So just want any thoughts on that?
I think the past 2 years have proved, just in our system, in our little corner of the world here, that we are more able to manage riskier situations from a weather point of view, because of our flexibility with the ridiculous rotation that we've got and the stupid amount of crops that we try and grow. It always means I've got plan B, C, D, E, F, and probably G lined up, waiting to go if something changes. I'm not stuck in a third of the farm has to be wheat because that's how it fits a grain store and that's how it fits my contracts that I've forward sold. We are lucky that we're big enough to allow us the flexibility to move things around. We can move. This autumn, we moved a whole load of winter cropping back onto lighter land because we had a wet autumn. We now have predominantly spring cropping on very heavy ground. So the flexibility in our system, I think, reduces some of the risk aspects of it. And also having the livestock in the system and using our arable crops in conjunction with the livestock gives us that output from it. So if, for instance, our wheat decides to give up the ghost this summer, I know so far already that I've managed to graze every field that's got wheat in has so far been grazed already twice in the system. So there is an output already in the form of sheep that's come out of that system and has paid for half of its inputs already. So that sort of I would say our system makes us slightly less sort of less impacted by things like that.
Super, Ed. I'll let you off the hook now for a wee while, but thank you so much for that's a huge volume of information that you've thrown at us, and we're already nearly finished the whole session. So anyway, there was a really good question asked by Becky, and a lot of the comments coming in just about, does this all start with the soil? And I wanted to save that up to transition to Becky Wilson, who I know this is one of her favorite subjects, incredibly enthusiastic about it. And so without any further ado, Becky, I'm going to come to you if you are there.
I am there. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm going to try and condense what I'm going to talk about into 10 minutes so that we do actually have some time to involve this really good conversations, which I've seen flinging up on the chat. And I say it's really nice to be here. And thank you very much for having me. And I feel a little bit of a fraud because there's loads of experts and there's loads of great chat going on. So again, I'm just going to hopefully set the scene and talk a little bit about what we've been doing with Farm Carbon Toolkit. So I'm from Farm Carbon Toolkit. We're a farmer-led organisation aimed at trying to help farmers and growers understand practically what you can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve soil health, but very much with the idea of improving business resilience at the end of it. We have a carbon calculator, which allows you to calculate your carbon footprint, and then a toolkit and a range of other activities and projects that we get involved with, really helping, as I say, try and help farmers understand how they can sort of navigate the area of greenhouse gas emissions. And you could be forgiven for thinking, well, we're not talking about greenhouse gas emissions today, we're talking about agroecological farming, so why are you talking to us? Go away. But actually there's a really good link there between actually some of the things and the practices that we're talking about how we can improve resilience on the farm, how we can make better use of managing our resources, resource use efficiency. We've heard from both Lucy and Ed already about some of the ways that we can manage our resources, and that's intrinsically linked up with greenhouse gas emissions and adapting and mitigating our farms to climate change. We also start looking at how we manage our natural landscapes and how we help with ecosystem function. All of that is incredibly well tied up with how we manage our soils. There's been loads of discussions already about how we value, measure and manage our soils. And a lot of that comes down to the carbon content of our soils and that unique and that difficult balance between how we balance our nutrients, our carbon, our productive capacity and our soils resilience. What's also really important is to remember that not just about how we mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, but as Ed mentioned earlier, as farmers, we're at the forefront of actually our businesses being most vulnerable to the changing weather patterns that are coming. So again, really trying to build resilience and work with nature rather than spending time, money and resources battling against it is incredibly important. Now, one of the things that we found through the work that we've been doing, we've been working with farmers and growers on this sort of area, not as long as Leaf has for 30 years, but we've certainly been involved in this sort of thing for 10 years. And although it's really gained its popularity and attention over the last sort of 18 months, we've been sort of trying to bang this drum for the last 10 years. And some of the learnings that we found out at the end of it, really, and some sort of broad starting points, really, are that all farmers can make a difference. Okay, all farmers can make a difference in terms of that transition to agroecological practices, and in so doing, reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and improve their soil health. What do they need? They need knowledge and support and an understanding of what to do. Okay, but also it's really important to remember that it's not an either or. You're not either doing stuff for the environment or doing stuff for production. We have to try and link these two things together. And very much from what we do at the Carbon Cutting Toolkit, understanding it's not emissions reductions or sequestration. We've got to try and look at those things that do both. And what's also really important, again, there's been so much detail this morning about all the different things that can happen. It's just that real underlying understanding that it can be done. It may be complicated. There may be 6 trillion things that we can measure, but it can be done. And it starts with a single step. Now, one of the other things that Will asked me to talk about was some of the things that you can do to reduce carbon losses and build carbon within your soil. And that really starts for an understanding of where you are now, which starts by doing a carbon footprint. Because again, you can't document where you're going until you understand where you are now. There are some broad practices that you can focus on in terms of reducing emissions. Ed has already mentioned them. Very much focusing on nitrogen use efficiency. For arable farms, usually about 60% of their emissions are coming from nitrogen use. So again, it's a huge area where you can really focus on improving nutrient use efficiency and reducing your environmental impact at the same time. There's also lots of work and lots of evidence that's being drawn from how we do our tillage and our field operations, both in terms of protecting that carbon that we've already got in the soil, but also reducing diesel usage, which is a fossil fuel-based emission, which again helps save cost and also starts to help reduce our emissions. Also looking at how we use our machinery and other bits and pieces which all have an embedded carbon cost in them. And very much focusing on soil management, not just from a carbon perspective, but also by maintaining and protecting that soil structure, which will reduce nitrous oxide emissions. Again, a lot of discussions are very much focusing on carbon, but if we can also start to reduce our wet compacted soils, we'll also reduce our nitrous oxide emissions, very important. But we also have this ability to provide a climate solution through the ability that we have to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, allow our plants to use that through photosynthesis and hold it in our soils. And again, those broad principles that we need to look at are reducing the amount of carbon that's leaving the system. Okay, so looking at reducing cultivation frequency or tillage, really important. Feeding more carbon into the system, like Ed was saying, through efficient use of organic materials, through using crop residues, through that diverse rotation, which will all allow us to have more carbon that we have feeding into the system, and also starting to look at the depth at where it is. And then also creating those conditions for our plants to do what we need them to do. Take those free things that we're getting in terms of sunlight and water and actually photosynthesize and turn those into things that we can then sell. So creating those conditions that allow our plants to photosynthesize in that optimum capacity is really important. So what have we found? And what are we doing within the work that we do with farms, both in terms of that potential for soil carbon sequestration, but also in terms of reducing emissions? Well, as I say, we've been working with a range of farms within diverse farming systems and growing systems to really help them understand, to calculate, so where are they now, communicate and understand that, and then change. And quite often with carbon footprinting, that change bit at the end is often forgotten because, sometimes the processes of carbon footprinting can be a little bit boring, even for saddos like me. But very much also within that, we've been working with the Soil Carbon Project, and I've seen that a lot of the chats going on is very much focusing on how do we measure and how do we monitor these sort of things. And that's really what we've been looking at within the Soil Carbon Project, really trying to understand how do we measure for soil carbon, what's the potential for some of these management practices to really make a change in terms of allowing farmers to build soil carbon and soil health at the same time. And how do we start to do that in a way which also addresses some of those emissions that are coming from the farm? So we're not, again, just not focusing on sequestration and isolation, but we're also looking at emissions. And I suppose 3 key outcomes from that really is, one, we found that we can measure soil carbon. So that's brilliant. Yes, it might be slightly complicated and there's different ways of doing it, but we can do it. So that's great. Another benefit, farmers can build soil carbon. So that's even better, another positive. But what's really important is there's management impact. So farmers, what's under the farmers' control is how you manage that land, and that will have a real impact in terms of the ability of your soils to sequester carbon. And the really way to sort of frame it all to finalize it is to say, well, actually, what we need to be trying to do is to stack those practices that reduce emissions and improve sequestration at the same time, and really focus on those. And there's a lot of those within this, within the agroecological systems of farming that are really focusing on those. So a lot of the practices that Ed's been talking about integrating our organic manures and our fertilizers, looking at improving diversity. And I suppose just to conclude really, one of the other things that we do at Farm Carbon Toolkit is we run the Soil Farmer of the Year competition. And that's a competition that really aims to champion and promote those farmers that are doing fantastic things around sustainable soils management. Ed, I'd quite like to see an application from you. The application process is still open. It's open until the 5th of March this year. And we have, it's always a fantastic competition to run. And because we get to talk to loads of farmers who are doing brilliant things and have really been sort of pioneering these systems of farming over the last 10 to 20 years. And I suppose I was just sort of trying to think in my mind as to, because we have a diverse nature of farmers that are doing it, and the diverse nature of systems, what sort of connects them all together? And I suppose what really connects them all together is that they're all focusing on the soil, okay, and realizing the fact that the soil is central to everything that comes from it. Some of the practices that they're using, again, will vary depending on their farming system, but there's very much a focus on the use of cover crops. the reduction of tillage, the diversity of rotations. Ed's already spoken brilliantly about how diverse his rotation is, but very much about having that diversity within the system, which provides you not just a range of rooting depths, but also different crops with different windows and different management opportunities. There's also a lot of focus more recently on reducing fertilizer. And a lot of the farmers that we're working with are starting to get, a bit like Lucy was saying with that great project that she'd been involved with. You know, a lot of farmers are setting targets. Well, actually, we're going to try and reduce our fertilizer by 20%, by 25% over the next few years. And then we're going to look at trying to encompass and harness soil biology to help us to get there. But also very much they're working with nature rather than battling against it. And I suppose if we look more widely from practice a moment, just to finish off with looking at attitudes, well, they're all willing to try something new. They're willing to take that leap into the unknown to start to see what might work. They're willing to change and experiment. They're flexible. Ed's already spoken about how he's very flexible in terms of how things work. They're also quite often willing to work together with researchers, with other farmers, and as groups. Because again, we need to all work together and harness our knowledge in order to move this forward. They're also very good usually at gathering data. And data is really important because it allows us to show where we've been and also starts to allow us to put that evidence base underneath what we might want to do in the future. And so I think what we really need to finish is that there are tools out there. We can use carbon. Okay, carbon can be used as a sort of proxy for some of these things that we'll be talking about. And these tools allow us to show where we are now and start to identify some of the options that we might want to use in that transition in the future. But just doing something and understanding that we can all make a change just by taking that first step. And I think I'll be quiet at that point.
Becky, thank you so much. That's brilliant. I've got some questions to fire back at you. But first, because we're doing such a great job at not sticking to time, such I am, I just wanted to prime John Pawsey, David Aglin and Fidelity Weston, if I can chuck some questions at you in a minute, if you're ready for it. But first, I'm going to come to Becky. I was really the nitrous oxide and soil structure and wet soils and that area. It's a big part of the IDRI and Farming for Change research, is sort of shifting the focus from ruminants and enteric methane to actually the role of nitrogen application to our soil structures and nitrous oxide emissions. Like, how much are we making progress on that area? It never really seems to hit the headlines that much, that particular gas. Is it a really important area of progress? Do we need more research? Do we need more field practice to be able to progress, or do we already know enough to get on top of that particular greenhouse gas?
I think you're completely right. I think you know, there's a huge amount of attention on ruminants and methane, and actually if you look at the potency of those greenhouse gas emissions, you know, and again taking account of, we're not going to start talking about, you know, methane being a short-lived climate pollutant, but under the sort of traditional way of measuring them, obviously methane is 30 times more potent. Nitrous oxide is 298 times more potent. So its ability as a gas to sort of cause global temperature rise is much higher, and 80% of nitrous oxide comes from agriculture. So we're a key part of that. And I think, you know, there has been some really, really good research that's been done looking at, you know, efficient ways that we can start to reduce nitrous oxide emissions. It's just getting that message out, I think, and actually starting to understand some of those ways that we can improve nitrogen use efficiency. I mean, you know, if you look outside of agriculture, what other industry relies on something that at best field conditions, we're getting, you know, 60–65% efficiency, and we're still applying it? There are huge amounts of things that we can do in terms of, you know, looking at better matching crop demand, in terms of potentially putting it on, you know, in smaller amounts more frequently, looking at some of the work that's going on with inhibitors and other bits and pieces. But we have to also be able to understand the impact of some of those products on the wider soil biology and the soil, you know, the soil health network. So again, there is some interesting work being done there in terms of how we can balance nitrogen use efficiency and potentially the use of some of these products and these technologies to be able to better match crop demand, but also not inhibit any of those, you know, fungal networks and other things that are going on within the soil. So that's really important. But I think just really having a bit of an awareness raising campaign and understanding the fact that we do have nitrogen does have this big environmental impact, and actually there are a lot of quite easy wins and things that we can all do, from the back to basics in terms of nutrient management planning, in terms of, as Lucy was saying, or Neb was saying, looking at testing not just the soil but also testing the tissue and the end products and all the rest of it, so that we can really start to balance that nitrogen issue. Looking at the use of legumes. Our atmosphere is 78% nitrogen. We need to be harnessing it much more effectively and reducing our reliance on artificial nitrogen.
Thank you. And because I'm a complete child, I just really want to use this opportunity to promote the Farm Crap app for exactly this subject, which Becky was involved in developing down in the southwest.
Definitely. If we've got that, if we've got that opportunity to utilise organic manures, they're brilliant, both in terms of building soil health, but also providing those nutrients. So yeah, Farm Crap all the way.
Absolutely. And I want to segue, because I'm running out of time, but we want to talk about cows. I think they're important. And you mentioned Soil Carbon Farm of the Year, and I was watching an amazing video with the Brewsters up in Scotland. I just wanted if you could give a bit of a sense of what they've achieved with their sort of extensive mob grazing system up there, and the sort of results they're seeing. That'd be great. And then I'll come to Fidelity.
Perfect. Yeah. So Alex, we recognise this year as one of our Soil Farmer of the Year, just for those reasons, because he is doing fantastic work in terms of improving his grassland performance, improving his forage quality, also doing some really interesting work tracking that through into meat quality. And again, that's the sort of next frontier in terms of, we're doing all this work trying to work us on what's going on in the soil, but actually let's also then start to track that through into how those healthy soils provide healthy plants and healthy food. They've been doing some amazing stuff up there, both in terms of looking at the use of livestock pressure through different grazing patterns, and the use of mob stocking, through the use of improving the diversity of grassland species that they have there, in terms of building rooting depth, building soil health, being able to access nutrients, and do other sort of things like that within the soil. And they're seeing amazing results. And again, if anybody is interested, we did a virtual farm walk from broadcast from a hill up in Perthshire, and it is on YouTube. So as I say, please do look at that.
Right, very good. I'm just going to quickly, please, people, drop your thoughts, opinions, ideas into the chat. Please fill out the survey. We're really keen to make the most of this gathering of like-minded and expert minds together. So please do that. Any reactions, any thoughts, any good questions, please feed them in. They'll be incredibly valuable in terms of how we follow this event up and make use of it, because there's so much ground to cover and we can't do it all right now. So Fidelity, I can't see you on my screen, but I'm hoping you might be there, because I think we want to talk about cows and pasture and the role that they play in rotations and supporting biodiversity outcomes and carbon goals. First of all, are you there?
I am here, Will. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
So I was wondering whether you could give a sense of the full kind of system of benefits we see from pasture-based livestock. It's a big part of the IDRI model. And integrating more permanent pasture, more extensive livestock systems across the country and into our farming systems. What are you seeing on your farm?
Okay, well, maybe I should talk about it, Will, from the point of view of the Pasture Fed Livestock Association, just give you, because the time is short, give you a quick run through. So the PFLA, as we call ourselves, is a membership organisation. We've got around 650 members at the moment, and we are mainly farmers, but not entirely farmers. We've got butchers, chefs, restaurateurs, academics. We're a fairly broad church, and we're trying to bring everybody behind the role that raising your ruminants, so that's cattle and sheep, entirely from pasture, that can include forage crops in the cereal rotations, is really good for the environment, good for animal health, and good for human health as well. I think Becky's making a really interesting point about there's lots more research to track that all the way through. So as a group of farmers, because we're all aiming to actually take cereals out of our animals' diets altogether, and you don't have to do that to be a member of the PFLA, but that's what we're sort of aiming for, and we have a certification scheme that backs that up. It really makes our members focus on their grassland and generally their forage production. And it's fascinating to see how people join the PFLA, and after a few years they're starting to make changes which will lead to deeper rooting plants, extending the season of their pastures, and generally trying to keep their animals out longer. And there's a cohort of people, and that probably includes the Brewsters, as I expect as well, who are now managing their animals on tall pastures, keeping them out over the winter and outwintering them. So there's a really good business case for managing your land like this, because you reduce the very significant housing costs that otherwise happen over the winter. So I think that, you know, it's a real win-win system if you can get it in place. But to get it in place, you know, your conventional farming neighbours will think you're completely nuts, and it's really great to be part of an organisation, another group of farmers who give great support on all of that front, both moral support, but also actually really good practical support on how other people have done this journey before them. So going back to us at home, Will, I'd say that I've been really fortunate that just 15 miles down the road have been a couple of amazing farmers who have moved from conventional farming systems, and their soils, they're on heavy Kent clay soils. You pour a trough of water onto that soil now and it just disappears just like that. Well, there's no way we can do that at home, but I'm looking forward to the time when I can do that. And, you know, being on that learning journey with them has been absolutely brilliant. That's it in a nutshell, Will.
Thank you, Fidelity. And I think that the whole area, some of it feels, I'm chatting to Ed, a bit like wizardry, and like that you're going to achieve these incredible outcomes. And I know, like for us at home on the farm, poaching and set stocking, it's a big issue. It's a big sort of blocker to these kind of, like, the mindset of these sort of approaches. I just wanted to chuck something at you, Fidelity, which maybe we could pick up in the chat, because I want to go to John Pawsey next. But really the link between the sort of agronomic way that we farm and rear animals and produce crops, and nutritional benefit and gains in our diets and our health. So I know that's a real area of interest for the PFLA and your members, and something which I think we need to make the link a lot clearer. There's probably a lot more research needed. I don't know if you can quickly come back on that one.
Yes, so there is definitely research, and we've the PFLA has used a lot of research from the States on the fact that even if you feed cereals just for the last 8 weeks of an animal's life, you reduce the nutritional benefits of that piece of meat, and particularly the level of omega-3 to omega-6s, which is very important. We're really pleased. There's a great woman called Gillian Butler, who's a researcher at Newcastle University. She's just become a director of the PFLA, and she has also just published, I think it's really fresh off the press, some more evidence about all of this. And it's not just showing its pasture, but it's also showing that meat from diverse pastures is particularly high in nutrients as well. It's an area of work that we would definitely like to see more work done on, as we believe that is the ultimate thing that distinguishes those people who are really genuinely doing 100% grass finished meat products or dairy products, and those who are just dropping below it. And it's that final percentage that pushes you as a farmer to really try and get the most out of your grass. And really that just has to, from common sense, lead to deeper rooting plants, sequestering more carbon, using more sunlight. That's the way it will work. So that is an area, Will, that I think it's very expensive doing this research. Testing the meat is expensive, and, you know, farmers wouldn't necessarily want to spend the money on it themselves. So it'd be a really good area to try and get some more funding towards, really.
Yeah. Thank you, Fidelity. John, are you there? John Pawsey, I'd love to come to you.
Yeah, I am there. I heard my name and then suddenly my iPad went off. It all went horribly wrong.
Very good. John, you've been farming organically for quite some time. And I was just wondering, you know, a lot of the practices we're talking about now, I guess their best reference point is really organic farming and organic systems and how that all started. I was wondering, what are you seeing in terms of the results on your farm now? You've been on a long journey. You know, I think you've got integrated livestock, your spring cropping, and you know, huge areas of wildlife havens and pollen and nectar mixes and that sort of thing. What are the sort of results that you're seeing, and do you feel like this is an achievable and scalable approach for more people to be doing at scale in the UK? Yeah.
Well, yeah, as far as the results are concerned, obviously, this is just a never-ending journey, and it was really inspiring actually hearing Ed talk. And I thought my system was complex, and then I heard him talk and thought, oh my God, I've got to try harder. But as far as we're concerned about building resilience and profit actually into what we're doing is by building more complex systems. And so it's just constantly sort of developing those complex systems. And I put a bit up in the chat about how, what I felt was needed as far as plant breeding was concerned and those kind of things. But I think the biggest challenge with all of this and to make it scalable is a very important thing that Lucy said right at the very beginning, and it's about a way of thinking. It's actually about giving people the confidence to think differently. And when we converted to organic production, we had something called the Organic Conversion Information Service, OSIS, which was a huge help and gave us confidence as a convert. But it's about looking across your farm and seeing your farm in a very different way and having the confidence to just recognize something that looks very, very different. And that sort of comes back down to farming groups, social media, but also our agricultural colleges, just encouraging everyone to have the confidence, because I feel and I worry that in the past, because we've had all these agronomists telling us what we should be doing, is actually we've actually de-skilled the farmers that we've got, and we've got to make them feel confident and reskill them, farmer to farmer learning. But also, if we're all sort of going down this route, then there's more research and development going into these kind of systems, more productivity, and absolutely, and then it can be scalable.
Super. Thank you, John. I'm really conscious it's 1:30 now. I've been told by the team I need to get a move on and close this very interesting conversation, which I could probably carry on for ages, down. One of the things, Verity, I just wanted to tee you up. We wanted to get a quick poll up, one of these fancy interactive things where you vote on it and tell us what you think. So we will, Verity, if you could start getting that organized. I wanted to come to David Aglen though before we finish, because David, are you there first of all?
Yes, I am, Will. Yep.
Hi, David. So you're on a bit of a journey, I think. AHDB Strategic Farm up in Fife in Scotland, towards, I guess, more agroecological farming and looking to share what you're doing with others. Are there any particular sort of aspects that you've learned on that process and journey so far at Balburney Farms?
I like the comments about tidiness. Yes, our farm looks distinctly scruffy compared to our next door neighbours, and it's pretty much all by the public road. But yeah, the heart is the mindset has been difficult to change, particularly for some of the guys we have working on the ground. That's been the biggest challenge. We're a big farm, so we can't just, it's not just me and Johnny Barford doing it. There's others involved, so we've got to get the team engaged in what we want to do within the business. We've managed to get on board with the HDB, looking at regenerative or agroecological farming, whichever term you wish to choose, and to try and prove some of the theory. There's been a bit of chat in the chat column about, how do we get this information out there? Where's the science behind it? Is there science behind it? A lot of it's anecdotal. There's a lot of stuff in other countries around the world. We just need to transfer that information back here. So we're setting out to see whether we can grow economical crops that are not necessarily organic, but we're not using fungicides. We did manage to grow our whole 200 acres of our bean crop 2 years ago with only using trace elements and no fungicides, and it was a great success. Crop made the market quality, and we got a decent price, and we were happy. Last year we got behind the curve for various reasons, and we had to revert to fungicides. So it's a different way of thinking. The management, John Posey hit the nail on the head. We've been sat for 80, 90, 100 years being taught by agronomists how to grow our crops. We've lost a huge amount of knowledge that our ancestors had. They knew what to do. They knew what was wrong and right with their soils. And we've got to relearn that as managers and business owners. The management time that goes into this type of farming, and you do end up with complex businesses like Ed's sounds like, that it takes that time, and it's just finding the balance there. We use less machinery, we spend less money on machinery, we spend less on labor and inputs, hopefully in the long run. But the guys making the decisions need to use their brains an awful lot more. That's where I've got to so far.
Absolutely, thank you, David. And it reminds me when you're talking there about how, I first got into all of this was actually at Ed's farm. I think talking to the agronomist there at the time, and he described the approach that Ed was looking to progress as modern mixed farming, and it's sort of stuck with me ever since. It's a combination of learning a lot of the lessons from history and our forefathers, plus making use of best available science and data and technology that we have at our disposal right now.
I've said many times
huge amount to cover.
We need to look backwards to go forwards in this industry. We really do.
Thank you, David. Very good point. I think Verity, should we get the quick poll up and get that job done? Right. What's the plan here, Verity? Do we?
You just need to go to menti.com and put in the code, and you can vote in the poll.
Super. So yeah, I think you just need to click on the link, or copy it into your browser. It'll take you to a different window, and then you could click on the poll. That would be really helpful, just for some of our outputs from the workshop. I'm really conscious that we didn't give ourselves enough time at all to do this any justice. I don't want to take up too much more of your time because we're already 7 minutes over. But I think we are keen to carry this conversation on. If others are, we feel there's more mileage in it. We'd really welcome your feedback on that. What you would like us to be doing next in this space. We're an independent organisation. The job is, how do we make this make more sense to people? How do we make it more feasible and practical to implement? So please do carry on putting your thoughts, comments, links, evidence, ideas in the chat function, and indeed in the survey which Verity has posted. But I wanted to say a huge thank you to Lucy for joining us from Leaf, to Ed for just dumping a serious amount of knowledge and ideas on our plates there, a lot for people to digest, and to Becky for bringing to life all the excellent work of the Farm Carbon Cutting Toolkit, and for various others. There's so many more people we wanted to bring into this conversation. I think we're going to leave the Zoom kind of open in terms of the chat function, for people to keep commenting, chatting, reacting to what's been said. It'd be really great if you could do that. And to complete the survey and the poll that Verity's put up. We will be doing another one of these, I hasten to say, next week, same time, 12 o'clock, Tuesday, and we'll be covering land management in its more sort of broad sense. So covering elements like forestry and woodland and agroforestry and land tenure, and how we make long-term decisions. But thank you so much to everyone who's joined us and participated and added your comments in. A huge thank you to Verity for making all the technology work. We will call it a close there. And if you want to join in, please do so next week on Tuesday. Cheerio. If anyone does have any questions and wants to hang around and chat, I'm more than happy to carry it on, but we'll probably shut it down in 5 or 10 minutes.
I'm going to head off if there's nothing anyone else wants to ask of me, but thank you very, very much, Will and Verity. It was really, really great event, and thank you to Ed and Becky. Really nice to see you and nice to hear more about your system, Ed. Great. Hopefully we can come to your farm at some point and see it in action.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lucy. That's great. Yeah, it'll be great when we can actually talk about this in the field and in action.
Oh, bring it on. Bring it on.
That's when it makes sense.
Right. Take care, people. Goodbye.
Bye, Lucy.
Cheerio. Ed, there's a few people who want to speak to you.
Yeah.
And email you directly.
To harangue me for my wild ideas.
So I don't know if you're happy for that to happen, but
oh, you know me,